Well, today we have decided with discussion with the principal, with the honorable principal. We were actually confused with the topic, and I later on suggested how about Drugs and Cosmetics Act and rules. Then he said, "Fine, that's a good idea," and we all be aware of the legal provisions of Drugs and Cosmetics Act, or any legal binding or anything related with law. So let us start. I'm Dr. Harsha NM, as has been introduced by the speaker then. Now there are two issues here. One is Drugs and Cosmetics Act 1940 and Drugs and Cosmetics Rules 1945. We're going to talk about both of them. Now, first of all, let us look into this. How different are acts and rules? See, first of all, we must understand a bill which is passed by both houses of the parliament and eventually approved by the president, which we all know. I mean, if someone follows the current affairs, then very recently there was a huge uproar in passing of in the approval of Citizenship Amendment Act, and also later on the farm laws, popularly known as the farm laws. So we have been listening to these things, more often nowadays, that some rule, some act has been passed in the parliament, that is tabled in the parliament, tabled in Rajya Sabha, tabled in Lok Sabha, and so on. So we need to understand that there will be a draft which will be formulated, which will be written based on a proper study about a particular situation, and the recommendations of that committee or whatever has been formed to study on that will be modified, will be drafted, it will be jotted down and then drafted, and that draft will be sent to the public domain to invite any problems in that. If the people have any problems with that, they can, that there is a proper channel wherein they can raise their objections, or they can red flag the points which they intend to do so. So after that, after the draft is approved, then the draft is tabled in either of the two houses, the Rajya Sabha or Lok Sabha, and later on in the other house. So I mean to say, both houses should pass this draft, and once both houses pass the draft, that will go to the President of India, and the President of India would sign on that, and later on, after signing, the whole law will be published through the Gazette of India. Okay, then it becomes a law. But the situation is a little different with Drugs and Cosmetics Act and rules. Why? The time when it was passed, it was 1940, and there was no President of India. Okay, we'll go to the history of it in a moment. But let us understand that Act is a bill or a draft which is passed by both houses and approved by the President. Yes? Okay. And whereas, what is a rule? Rule is that which help to govern the act. Act should be implemented. Okay, the implementation part of it is with the rules. In simpler terms, act is conceptual in nature, whereas rule is executive in nature. It lays down the laws, it lays down the principles, it lays down the do's and don'ts, and also the penalties if there is any deviation. All these things will be looked after by the rules. And in further simpler terms, if we want to understand, act is primary and rule is secondary. So now we'll go to a brief history of the Drugs and Cosmetics Act. So what happened in the early 20th century was there was absence of a robust system of drug control. Okay, drug control in the sense drug manufacturing, drug distribution, drug administration, all these things. For all these things, there was no robust system, which the situation was complicated further by the fact that after the First World War, cheaper and substandard drugs, which were already prepared, which were already manufactured for their own uses by the forces, sorry, like France, Germany, and Italy, and so on. So what happened was those drugs flooded the Indian market, and they were spurious in nature. They were not having good, quality. So this was a problem, and the public complained to the government, and the government also thought that something needs to be. So the government appointed a drug inquiry committee under Colonel R.N. Chopra in 1930. And based on the recommendations of this committee, the then government passed an act in 1940. Okay, this is a brief historical background about the Drugs and Cosmetics Act. And further, how this particular law has been transforming, that we'll see. See, originally when the act was passed, it was called the Drugs Act. It was just called the Drugs Act, and this was prepared, as I told, in accordance with the recommendations of Chopra Committee of 1930 and 31, and predominantly to deal with the issues of spurious drugs in the Indian market. Okay, and the related drugs rules was passed in 1945. Okay, the act was passed in 1940. The draft was ready, and it took almost 5 years for them to formulate the executive part of it. So it was passed in 1945, and in 1964, this is very important for us. In 1964, the act was amended to include ASU drug. ASU, throughout the draft of Drugs and Cosmetics Act, you can see ASU drugs. ASU means Ayurveda, Siddha, and Unani drugs. Okay, so in 1964, only in 1964, Ayurvedic drugs were included in this, or the horizon or the scope of this act was extended to cover even Ayurvedic and Siddha and also Unani drugs. Okay, since then, it has seen about 11 major amendments, like I have mentioned here: 1960, 62, 64, 72, 82, 86, 95, 2008, 2017, 2018, and 2019. Okay, several amendments have been happening, and amendments are not new to any law, because at the time of framing the law, the structure or the picture of the society will be something else, and the society starts taking its own forms, its own developing ramifications as the time goes on, and the act also should be amended accordingly, so that everything will be brought under this law. And see, this is a link for the PDF of the draft. You can, copy this link and get the PDF downloaded. Now, let us see the objectives. What were the objectives of passing this law? First of all, it was to regulate the import, manufacture, distribution, and sale of drugs and cosmetics through licensing. It is very important. Don't miss a word here. When you're teaching the students, you have to be very specific that the students will not miss even a single word here. See, it is first of all regulation, and regulation of what? Regulation of the import of drugs, the manufacture of drugs, distribution of drugs, and sale of drugs. I mean, marketing of drugs, isn't it? It's not just the drugs here. It is also about the cosmetics. It's also about the cosmetics, and very importantly, all these things have to be done through licensing. I mean, without a license, you cannot do this. Okay, without a license, you cannot do this. So this is what it conveys. And the second objective is to manufacture, distribution, and sale of drugs and cosmetics by qualified persons only. No unqualified person starts preparing the medicine. No, it is mandatory to, or it is very imperative to make sure that no unqualified or unskilled person starts manufacturing or marketing or administering drugs. Okay. And to prevent substandard drugs from entering the market, so this is also very important. The initial object, the initial start, rather the starting point itself was this. The substandard drugs which had flooded the Indian market, there was no control over that. So in order to have a control on the imported drugs, this was first considered. And to regulate the manufacture and sale of Ayurvedic, Siddha, and Unani drugs. Well, this is also, so far I have told about all the drugs in general, and specifically for us to regulate the manufacture and sale of ASU drugs, and to establish Drugs Technical Advisory Board and Drugs Consultative Committees for allopathic and allied drugs and cosmetics. Even in Ayurveda, even for Ayurvedic drugs, we have the Drugs Technical Advisory Board and also Ayurvedic Drugs Consultative Committees. We'll look into some of the definitions. Well, I think these definitions have been discussed and have been studied already by each one of us. But let us, for the sake of knowing, let us look into these things. What are drugs? Drugs are all medicines for internal or external use of human beings or animals, and all substances intended to be used, okay, intended to be used or in the diagnosis, treatment, mitigation, or prevention of any disease or disorder in human beings or animals, which includes the preparations applied on the human body for the purpose of repelling insects like mosquitoes. Even a mosquito repellent is also a drug. No, we need to remember, the scope of our Drugs and Cosmetics Act is such that it also covers these things. Even mosquito repellents which are available in the market, like there could be some coils, mosquito coils, all these things come under this act. And what are cosmetics? Cosmetics are like any article intended to be rubbed, poured, sprinkled or sprayed on, or introduced into, or otherwise applied to the human body or any part thereof for cleansing, beautifying, promoting attractiveness, or altering the appearance, and includes any article intended for use as a component of cosmetic. No, it's not just the final cosmetic cream, something like the cream which is available in the market, which is considered as a cosmetic. Also, its components, come in the purview of this. Now let us look into some of these definitions, like misbranded drug. What are misbranded drugs? Misbranded are the drugs which are so colored, coated, or powdered, or polished that the damage is concealed. If there is a damage or if there is any fault, if it is concealed, if it is covered by means of color or coating or any powder or any polishing, and if it is made to appear of better or greater therapeutic value than it really is. See, there is a very thin line. We cannot really say whether this is misbranded or not. Like if you go by the definition, we need to understand, if you go by the definition, it is said, see, if it is made to appear of better or greater therapeutic value than it really is. Okay. Now consider Haridra Khanda. Consider Haridra Khanda, and the reference of Haridra Khanda, it says if you use Haridra Khanda for a week, what happens? Tapta Kanchana Bhasa. The complexion will be like gold. It will be like molten gold, red hot gold. So, is it really, rather, is it realistic or not? This we have to see. Should we brand Haridra Khanda as a misbranded drug here or not? The reference says that, but the actual justification for this is, in the case of Haridra Khanda, it is the reference in the textbook which is saying that. Okay. The difference is, when you're marketing, you're not saying that it leads to such a complexion and you have to use this. Okay, it doesn't come in the marketing part. So this we have to be very clear about. And yes, if it is not labeled in the prescribed manner, well, that is a way of labeling drugs, and if it is not labeled in the prescribed manner, that is also called as misbranded drug. And if proper information about safety and administration is not mentioned, this also becomes misbranded. And what is an adulterated drug then? The difference is, if the adulterated drug consists in whole or in part of any filthy, putrid or decomposed substance. It has been prepared, packed or stored under insanitary conditions whereby it may have been contaminated with filth. Or if its container is composed in whole or in part of any poisonous or deleterious substance which may render the components injurious to health. Okay, so these are called as adulterated drugs. And interestingly here, yes, spurious drugs, you can see the picture here. See, the first one is authentic. This is authentic and this is fake. The one who has not seen the authentic drug, is there any possibility that he or she can consider or even think of the fact that this is a fake drug? No, such will be such will be the brands, or such will be the marketing techniques of some unworthy, unpoor, persons. You can see here, there is very little difference, in the way these bands, colored bands, are put here. You can see. Okay, name of the company is the same, name of the drug is the same, and see, this is complete intact, whereas this is not that complete. This is coming and ending here, whereas it starts from here. The line starts from here, and after coming around, it ends here. Very subtle changes are seen in such things. Okay, if a drug is imported under a name which belongs to another drug, that is also called spurious. If it is an or imitation of, or a substitute for another drug, okay, then also it is spurious. In relation to any drug or cosmetic, it includes any process or part of a process for making, altering, ornamenting, finishing, packing, labeling, breaking up, or otherwise treating or adopting any drug or cosmetic with a view to its sale, with the sole purpose of increasing the sale or distribution. If some unethical practices are employed, such drugs can be called spurious drugs. Now, let us look into the Drugs and Cosmetics Act. If you want to have an overview of this, the Act has 6 chapters and 2 schedules, and the rules per se has about 26 parts and about 39 schedules. 39 schedules from A to Y. You might be wondering, from A to Y, A to Z, it is 26. How can it be 39? So many schedules are like A1 or AA1. Schedules have been named like that. So let us look into the Act. In the Act, the first chapter is introductory. Second chapter is about the Drugs Technical Advisory Board and the Central Drugs Laboratory, about these things. The third chapter is about import of drugs and cosmetics. The fourth chapter is about manufacture, sale, and distribution of drugs and cosmetics. Okay. And the next chapter, which is 4A, it is not 5, it is 4A because it was included later on. When the Act was formed, it was only 5, there were only 5 chapters. But in 1962, as I've told you, ASU drugs were inducted into the purview of Drugs and Cosmetics Act. So at that time, the chapter was named 4A, which gives the provisions relating to Ayurveda, Siddha, and Unani drugs. And chapter 5 is miscellaneous. And coming to the schedules here, this schedule is very important. I'll tell you why later on. The schedule 1A is about Ayurvedic and Siddha systems. The schedule 1B is about Unani system. As I've told you, there are 2 schedules in the Act. The first schedule is divided again into 2 as 1A and 1B. And in 1A, you have Ayurvedic and Siddha systems. And the second schedule relates to the standards to be complied with any imported drugs manufactured for sale, stocked, or exhibited for sale or distribution. Okay. So this is in brief about the Act. And if we look at the rules, this is very important for us. Rules is more important for us because, as I've told you, this is the executive part of it. So let us straight away go to part 16, where it tells about the manufacture of Ayurvedic drugs. ASU drugs Wherever there is Ayurveda, unless mentioned, it is for ASU drugs. Okay, so for making it simple, henceforth we'll just refer it to as Ayurvedic drugs. Okay, so the part 16, the 16th part deals with manufacture of Ayurvedic drugs. And manufacture of Ayurvedic drugs for what? For sale. Okay, if you are manufacturing for your own use, this does not apply. Then part 16A, approval of institutions for carrying out tests on Ayurvedic and other Indian drugs. And part 17 deals with labeling, packing, and limit of alcohol of Ayurvedic, including Siddha and Unani drugs. Okay, as I've told you earlier, there is a specific way a drug should be packed or should be labeled. Okay, so all these things are dealt with in part 17, and in part 18, the government analysis, it tells about the government analysts and inspectors for ASU drugs, and the 19th part deals with standards of Ayurvedic drugs. And coming to the schedules, Schedule A tells about the forms. What are these forms? These are, stereotype forms. These are pro forma, you can say. These are like pro forma, in which you have to apply for a license. Like Schedule E tells about the list of poisonous substances under the ASU systems of medicine. And Schedule T, very important, deals with GMP, good manufacturing practices of Ayurvedic drugs. And when it comes to forms, Form 24T is about application for obtaining a license for manufacture of Ayurvedic drugs. Form 24E is again form for application for loan license. What is a loan license? Loan license is, well, you have the capital to start a company, to start an Ayurvedic drug company, but you don't have enough capital to buy a land and establish the structure, establish the factory. Then there is person B who is having that establishment, and that person is not utilizing the establishment to its fullest capacity. In that case, what you can do is you can collaborate with that person and get the drugs manufactured for you, which will be marketed under your name. Okay, for that, there is an application. This is 24E. And again, 25D is license, the form of license. 25E is for the form of, is the license for loan license. Oh, sorry, form for loan license. And 26D is certificate of renewal. 26E is for certificate of renewal for loan license. And again, 26E1, certificate of GMP. And Form 40 is application for grant or renewal of approval for carrying out tests on ASU drugs. Not any person can conduct tests on Ayurvedic drugs. Of course they can, but the test reports will not be considered authentic. So, Form 41 is approval for carrying out tests for tests or analysis on ASU drugs or raw materials. Form 42 is certificate for carrying out tests or analysis on ASU drugs or raw materials used. And Form 47 is application for grant or renewal of approval. These things are self-explanatory. You can read on. Form 48 is again approval for carrying out tests. 49 is certificate of renewal for carrying out tests. There is a certificate issued already, and that needs to be renewed. For issuing, there is a separate form. For renewal, there is a separate form. That is what we need to understand. Okay. And Form 50, this is the way, this tells the way the test report should be published. A report of test or analysis by approved laboratory. Okay. So now we'll look into the provisions of this act, limiting ourselves to Ayurvedic drugs. See, the first provision is the Drugs Technical Advisory Board for Ayurveda and Drugs Consultative Committee for Ayurveda. Definitions of misbranded and adulterated and also spurious drugs, as I've discussed. And regulation and prohibition of manufacture for sale of ASU drugs. There should be a regulation. There should be proper regulatory system for ensuring only good quality drugs are released to the market. So this is Drugs and Cosmetics Act is actually dealing with that. And the powers of central government, this also tells about the powers of central government and the government analysts and inspectors. And this also tells about the penalty for violation of such provisions or such rules. And I told you the Schedule 1A is very important. Why? The Schedule 1A is a list of about 84 classical texts, including 57 textbooks of Ayurveda, where you have Charak Samhita, you have Sushruta Samhita, you have Ashtanga, Hridaya, Sahasra Yogam, you have whatnot, even Charamdar Samhita. All these textbooks have been included in that. And why this is necessary? This is quite interesting. For any drug to be released into the market, you need to take that drug through many phases of clinical trials. First of all, in the laboratory, and then at the level of experimental study, wherein you are going to try that on animals, and then only once the safety is established, then you try that on healthy volunteers, and then on particular disease. That follows multi-centric studies. And only after that, if you still feel that your particular drug is effective, then you are allowed to release that drug into the market. So this involves a huge lot of money and also time. However, if there is any drug mentioned in any of these 54 classical textbooks, that drug need not undergo clinical trials. Okay, that is why this particular schedule is very important. So if we look at this at a glance, you can see separate applications for each manufacturing unit. That is very specific here. Not just that, each product you need to have a separate license. You can also have a loan license for the one who does not have own manufacturing premises. And there is a provision for issuing certificate of GMP. And there is also a list of minimum equipment in testing unit. Okay. You need to have a testing unit which is going to be in-house. Okay, in-house testing laboratory should also be there. And there are, of course, some tests on the drugs conducted by some machines or some advanced techniques, which each manufacturing unit may not be able to afford to have at the in-house laboratory. Only in such cases, the drugs can be sent for analysis in such recognized laboratories. When it comes to labeling here, The labeling should have the true list of ingredients with the quantity along with the reference. Okay, the true list of ingredients with quantity along with the reference. So, of course, nowadays the government has given us, an unwritten kind of relaxation that suppose it is Chyawanprash. Chyawanprash has more than 50 ingredients. You cannot go on listing 50 ingredients in the label. It is very hard to comprehend. It is very hard to see. So we are actually limiting ourselves to mentioning of the reference, mentioning of correct reference. Even if we mention the correct reference, that is fine. And yes, it is very important that the name of the drug you prepare, you manufacture, is in accordance with the reference. No, if it is Talisadi Churna, you have taken reference from Charmadar Samhita, and you cannot name it Mahatalisadi Churna. Okay, or there is the flip side to it. We also have seen that traditional practitioners have found that a particular change in the a particular modification in the reference in the formula may be helpful for the patients. In that case, they may add one extra entity into Talisari Churna. In that case, that particular product which is released to the market from that manufacturer cannot have the name Talisari Churna. Okay, it should be something else. They may name it Mahatalisari. Here. And yes, name and address of the manufacturer should be legibly present, and the license details as manufacturing license number or ML, it should be prefixed with this or this. This number should be present conspicuously. The batch number should be mentioned in each label, on each label, and the date of manufacture, date of completion, of course it is date of completion, but in some cases, the drugs take 1 day or 2 days for getting prepared. That is not an issue here. Take, for example, some reference of Rasa Shastra, wherein it takes months together to get prepared. In that case also, you cannot have the date of starting of the manufacture, the starting of the process. You need to mention the date on which that drug was completely formed or it was prepared. The words Ayurvedic medicine or Ayurvedic proprietary medicine, as the case may be, should be clearly mentioned. Okay, another thing, in normal circumstances, it should be mentioned as Ayurvedic medicine, or if the formula or if the formulation is from a different, rather if that does not have any reference in the classical textbooks, then it should be clearly mentioned as Ayurvedic proprietary medicine. And yes, of course, for external use only if it is intended so. Now, this is very interesting. What is the alcohol limit? Which is allo. See, any drug, any Ayurvedic drug is allowed to contain up to 12% alcohol. Okay, that is the blanket rule, or that is the blanket provision which this law gives us. Up to 12% alcohol, it is fine. But yes, there are some drugs here, like Mrita Sanjeevani Sura and Mahadrakshasva. Oh, these are allowed to have up to 16% alcohol. Okay, this is because what we have seen is if we start manufacturing, if we start preparing this, and especially you can see Pipalya Sava, marked it with a star mark. This is you ask any person preparing the drug, you manufacturing the drug, manufacturing Pipalyasava, and ask about the alcohol limit. The alcohol limit will be invariably more than the allowed limit. Okay, if it is properly prepared as per the classical method. Okay, so in such cases, it becomes a problem for even the manufacturer and also for the authority, you know, to assess this, how this can be done. You know, if it has to be less than the allowed percentage, then you have to stop the fermentation well within the actual prescribed time. But if you continue up to the prescribed time, then it will be more than the allowed limit. And we all have seen, we have studied that you keep an arista or asava endlessly. It doesn't mean that it goes on becoming 12 to 16, 16 to 18, then to 20, 25. It is not so. That cannot happen. You know, there is a self-control mechanism which is seen in asava and arista preparations. Okay, maximum, it goes to the maximum level. The alcohol content goes to the maximum level, and it then consolidates. You know, it never crosses that. That's also we have seen. But of course, considering all these things, they have set a standard that any alcohol containing drugs can contain alcohol up to 12%, except Mrita Sanjeevani Sura and Mahadrakshasava. And there's also about mention about the maximum size of packing. There is a regulation about the maximum size of packing, because these, if packed in larger quantities, may lead to other problems. Okay, like Karpura Asava, maximum limit is 15 ml. Ahifena Asava 15 ml. Mrugamada Asava again 15 ml. Mrita Sanjeevani Sura 30 ml is allowed. And Mahadraksha Asava 120 ml. These preparations have been specifically mentioned in the text. I mean, mentioned in GMP. Mentioned in Drugs and Cosmetics Act. So now looking to the GMP aspect of it. Dr. Sanu?
Yes, sir.
Hello. Is it okay? I think I'm exceeding my time.
Okay, sir. Okay.
Is it okay, or we shall just run through GMP? Okay. All of us know about GMP. You know, it is given in Schedule T, and it is prescribed to ensure that raw materials are authentic and prescribed quality, and they are not contaminated, and the manufacturing process is correct as per the standards. Adequate quality control measures have been adopted to ensure this, and also the manufactured drug which is released to the market is of acceptable quality. This is also has to be ensured. For these things, GMP is ensured. So GMP is rather consulted. And here also in Schedule T, Part 1 tells about good manufacturing practices. Part 2 tells about the list of recommended machinery, equipment, and minimum manufacturing premises, and list of some Unani drugs, and list of equipments recommended in in-house quality control section. Of course, this is not mandatory. We need to understand that this is not mandatory. Okay. In spite of not having enough minimum equipment or machineries in your in-house quality control section, you can run your pharmacy. Okay. And regarding the space allocation, well, there is a big list of it, and there needs to be a space for receiving and storing raw materials, manufacturing process areas, and quality control section, finished goods store. There, of course, I've missed packing section here, and there has to be an office, and there has to be a specific place for storing rejected goods. Okay, and the minimum area required is 1200 square feet. Even if you have about 1200 square feet of area with you, you can think of starting the office. And overall, GMP tells about location and surroundings, the buildings, the water supply, how the waste has to be disposed, how the containers have to be cleaned, and what about the stores like raw material store, packaging materials, finished goods. Manpower, health, clothing, sanitation and hygiene, medical services, first aid facilities you need to have, an annual medical checkup for all the staff working in your facility. Of course, machinery and equipment, the batch manufacturing records. You need to have you need to maintain records, just as we maintain records in the hospital about the patients. You also need to maintain records of the prepared drugs, and of course, distribution records. In a particular batch, this much drugs have been manufactured, and where we have sent the drugs. We have released it to market somewhere in the country, right? We cannot, release it all over the country at once. Okay, so how it has been done, how this staggering is done, all these things have to be maintained. And of course, record of market complaint. This is also important. If there is any complaint about a particular drug which you have prepared, you need to register that, and you also have to justify what action you have taken to overcome that. Okay, and also finally quality control. With all this, I mean, we can see that it is quite extensive. The scope of Drugs and Cosmetics Act is quite extensive, but there is a problem here. The problem is there is a controversy that there is a general feeling that this particular law does not enforce or does not recommend stricter laws or stricter penalty. Stricter penalty. Now there is an example for this. In the year 2013, the Bill and Melinda Gates. Everyone might be knowing about Bill Gates. So they have a foundation which they claim for charity, and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation funded a program which involves HPV, human papilloma virus vaccination trials on tribal girls in Andhra Pradesh and Gujarat, which was later on found to be unethical by a parliamentary committee. Okay, there is no strict law. There is no strict penalty against this as yet. So eventually they were left with a strict warning. That's all. That's all we could do. Okay, so the penalty aspect of it could be improved. Apart from Drugs and Cosmetics Act and rules, we are also governed by some laws like Drugs and Magic Remedies Act, Objectionable Advertisements Act 1954, Poisons Act, the Opium Act, Pharmacy Act, medicinal and toilet preparations, specifically to deal with excise duties Act 1954, IMCC Act, Indian Medicine Central Council Act 1970. Well, it is for our interest, and the Factories Act 1948. And well, this has been overshadowed by this act now, NCISM, National Commission for Indian System of Medicine Act, which was published in the Gazette on 11th June 2021. And the result of it is now you don't have the CCIM, you have NCISM. You don't have the council, you have the commission. So there are few takeaways. The first one is registered Vaidyas who have prepared medicine for dispensing among their own patients. They are spared, or they don't come under the purview of GMP. Okay, they don't come under the purview of GMP. They can prepare their drugs at home. They can prepare at their kitchen. They can, whatever they want. Of course, ethically there has to be quality. Of course, when there is no quality, no patient will come back. So drugs and formulations, drugs or formulations mentioned in any of 57 classical textbooks. That's what I was telling under the first schedule. They are also exempted from clinical trials, because clinical trials, phase-wise trials, take a lot of time and a lot of money. So for market, for sale, for marketing for sale, any Ayurvedic drug mentioned in such textbooks, it is not mandatory for it to go for such studies. And much of classical recommendations have been taken into account before framing this law, especially referring to Ayurveda. If you see the GMP part of it, you would be more clear about this. So I thank you for you. Thank you, Dr. Sanu, and also I thank Dr. N.S. Manjunatha sir for having given me an opportunity to participate in this webinar. Thank you.